3 days into her second marriage, my ex-wife called me sobbing from a gas station off Sparks Boulevard, and I let it ring 4 times before I picked up. That's not me being cruel. That's me finishing my coffee. My name's Gordon Ashby. I'm 45 years old. I've lived in Reno, Nevada my whole life. And up until 11 months ago, I was married to a woman named Renee. 14 years. A house in the Old Southwest with a porch swing I built myself. A dog named Roxy who liked her more than me, which should have told me something a lot earlier than it did. Here's the part people always want to skip to, the part where she left me. But I'm not going to give it to you yet, because if I do, you won't understand why it hurt the way it did. And you definitely won't understand why the ending tastes as good as it does. So bear with me. This is going to take a minute. Grab a coffee or something stronger. I won't judge. Let's go back to the second Sunday of April, the year I turned 44. That's the day my heart tried to kill me on a bridge deck 40 feet above the Truckee River, and my wife tried to finish the job 3 weeks later. Two very different kinds of failure. Only one of them worked out for her. Temporarily. I run a small structural inspection firm called Ashby Structural Group. We contract with the Nevada Department of Transportation, a couple of counties, and a handful of private developers who need someone to tell them the truth about whether their bridge, their parking garage, or their fancy new pedestrian overpass is going to hold up a school bus or fold like a lawn chair. It's not glamorous work. I show up in a hard hat and steel-toe boots. I climb around under things most people never look twice at. And I write reports that nobody reads until something goes wrong. It's also, and this is important, extremely profitable. Structural engineers who will climb under a bridge in February are rare. The contracts we hold with the state alone clear my company well past $150,000 a year in my own take-home, some years more. I've got 2 employees, a truck that's older than some of my nephews, and a bank account Renee never once asked to see, because as far as she was concerned, I played in the mud for a government paycheck. I let her believe that my father built this company from nothing with a slide rule and a stubborn streak, and the one thing he taught me before he passed was this: money that gets discussed at dinner parties has a way of changing the people sitting at the table. I watched it happen to 2 of his own brothers, so I drove the old truck. I wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation, and I let Renee think we were comfortable, not wealthy. I met Renee Whitlock at a wedding in Incline Village up at Lake Tahoe, back when I was 30 and she was 27. She had this laugh that turned heads across a room, and she noticed things. The fact I always ordered my steak medium instead of medium well. The fact I hummed old Fleetwood Mac songs under my breath without realizing it. We ended up at the same end of the reception table, and somewhere around the second round of drinks, she leaned over and said, "You're the quiet one everybody keeps pointing at. Is that a compliment?" "Depends what you did." She grinned as the words left her mouth, and I remember thinking I hadn't seen a smile aimed at me like that in longer than I wanted to admit. I inspect bridges. Nothing scandalous. Mostly, I just tell people whether their parking garage is going to eat their car. That's the least romantic sentence I've ever heard a man say to me at a wedding. "Give it time," I told her. "I've got worse ones." She laughed, that same laugh, and asked for my number before the cake was even cut, which was a first for me, because up to that point in my life, I'd been the one doing the asking, badly, and usually getting turned down. For the first 6, 7 years of our marriage, I thought I'd found someone who actually saw me. The specific parts of me most people scrolled right past. Somewhere around year 8, the seeing stopped. She'd opened a hair salon downtown 2 years into the marriage. Renee's real original name, I know, and it did fine. But fine wasn't the crowd she wanted to run with. Her friend group at the salon skewed toward husbands who were orthopedic surgeons and commercial real estate guys, fellas who wore watches that cost more than my truck. I remember the exact party where I first heard how she'd started describing me to people. One of her salon regulars cornered me by the drinks table, glass of wine in hand, and asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, Renee cut in from 3 feet away. "Oh, he does something with bridges." "Structural inspection." I kept it simple. "I make sure they don't fall down." "Right, that," Renee said, already turning back toward her friend. "The same tone you'd use describing a parking ticket you still needed to pay." "Anyway, Karen, tell me more about the chalet." I stood there holding a warm beer, forgotten mid-sentence at my own wife's side, and laughed it off the way you learn to when you don't yet know how many more times it's going to happen. I remember the exact night it curdled into something meaner. My mother, Patricia, 71 years old, drove over from Sparks to drop off a casserole and help me get the gutters cleared before Renee's book club showed up. Renee walked in, saw my mother's car in the driveway, and before she'd even set her purse down, she announced, loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear. Great. Another guest I didn't invite. My mother went still. She's the kind of woman who doesn't raise her voice, ever, so the quiet that followed felt like a held breath. I'm just helping Gordon with the gutters, Renee. I won't be in your way. You're never in the way, Patricia, Renee said, in the specific tone people use when they mean the exact opposite. It's just, this is supposed to be my space tonight. My mother left 20 minutes later, casserole, dish, and all, and I stood in that kitchen with my jaw locked so tight my molars ached. You didn't have to do that. Do what? Set a boundary in my own house. It's my house, too. And that's my mother, Renee shrugged. The kind of shrug that ends conversations on purpose. Maybe if your mother visited less, I wouldn't have to keep having this conversation. That was the first crack. I didn't know it yet, but it was the kind of crack that doesn't heal. It just spreads slow until the whole thing gives at once. After that, things went cold in the specific way marriages go cold when both people decide it's easier to coexist than to fight. We still ate dinner at the same table. We still slept in the same bed, mostly facing opposite walls. But the hand on the small of the back when we walked into a room, gone. The random, I saw this and thought of you texts, gone. What replaced it was worse than silence. It was irritation dressed up as normal conversation. Did you seriously wear that shirt to the Hendersons thing? She asked one night, straightening my collar with more force than the job required. It's a shirt, Renee. It's a shirt that makes you look like you fix vending machines. I let that one go too. I let a lot of things go. When I came down with the flu that January and ran a fever bad enough to soak through the sheets, Renee stood in the bedroom doorway with her coat already on. I've got a color appointment in 20 minutes. There's NyQuil under the sink. Okay, what else was there to say? Try not to get it everywhere, she added, and left. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about the woman who used to bring me soup without being asked, and wondering exactly when, in the middle of some ordinary week I never marked down anywhere, she'd quietly stopped existing. A few months after that, we went to a dinner party at the Hendersons' place in the Old Southwest, the same Hendersons whose party I'd apparently dressed wrong for once already. Renee spent the evening glued to a conversation about a Tahoe ski trip. A few of the wives were planning with their husbands, dropping in details about spa packages and private chalets like she'd already booked her spot. On the drive home, she went quiet in that specific way that meant she was building up to something. Diane's husband is taking her to Tahoe for their anniversary. 10 days, private chalet. Good for them. That's it? Good for them? What do you want me to say, Renee? I want you to say maybe we could do something like that once. Just once, Gordon. I'd like to not be the wife explaining why we're doing something more low-key this year again. I nearly told her right then. I nearly said I could buy that chalet outright and still not blink at the mortgage. But my father's voice was louder than the impulse, so I swallowed it. Same as always. We'll figure something out, I offered instead. The sentence people reach for when they have no intention of figuring anything out. And we both knew it. She turned toward the passenger window and didn't say another word the rest of the drive. And I remember gripping the wheel a little tighter than the road required, wondering when exactly my marriage had turned into a scoreboard I was permanently losing. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to find out just how far that indifference could stretch. And it would take something a lot worse than a dinner party or a ski trip to prove it. The bridge job that changed everything was routine. On paper, a pedestrian overpass connecting a new riverside development to the Truckee Riverwalk contracted through the city. Inspection scheduled for a Sunday morning when foot traffic was low, so we wouldn't have joggers and stroller moms weaving underneath us while we worked. Me and my lead inspector, a guy named Marcus Delgado, who's worked with me for 11 years and is closer to me than most of my actual blood relatives, were 40 feet up checking weld connections and deck capacity when my chest cracked open from the inside. I want you to understand what that Sunday looked like before it went sideways, because I've replayed it enough times that I could describe it with my eyes shut. The river was running high with spring melt, brown and fast, throwing up a fine cold mist that beaded on the steel. Marcus was 3 feet to my left, running a tape measure along a support strut, complaining, as he does every single job, about his knees. I remember laughing at some joke of his. I don't remember what. That detail's gone, and it bothers me more than it probably should. The last normal laugh of my old life, and I can't get it back. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Not a squeeze, not a pressure. A tearing, hot and sudden, like somebody reached into my sternum and pulled sideways. Gordon! Marcus's voice from somewhere far away and also right next to me. Gordon! Hey, look at me, man. You're gray. I remember the harness cutting into my shoulders as my knees gave out. I remember Marcus's hands and the radio crackling and the specific blue of the sky that Sunday, which is a stupid detail to remember, but it's the one that stuck. I woke up 2 days later in the cardiac ICU at Renown Regional Medical Center with a tube down my throat and Marcus asleep in a chair that was clearly built for someone 6 inches shorter than him. The surgeon, a cardiothoracic guy named Dr. Elena Marsh, came in that afternoon and laid it out plainly, the way good doctors do when they respect you enough not to soften it. You had what's called an aortic dissection, a tear in the wall of the main artery leaving your heart. Most people don't make it to the ambulance with that, let alone the operating table. How bad? I managed, my throat raw from the tube. You were in surgery almost 7 hours. The first 48 after, honestly, I wasn't going to bet on you out loud, even to your own family. She flipped a page on my chart, unhurried. But you're here, talking, asking me questions instead of just staring at the ceiling. That's not nothing. Am I going to be able to work again? Eventually. Not the way you did it before, not right away. Cardiac rehab, lifestyle changes, follow-ups for the rest of your life. But full recovery's on the table, which frankly surprises me more than it should at this point in my career. So I'm not dying, Dr. Marsh almost smiled at that. Not on my watch, Mr. Ashby. You're stubborn. Your body decided to cooperate. That's rare. Don't waste it. Marcus filled in the rest of it for me a few days later, once I was steady enough to hear it without setting off my own monitor. He'd called Renee himself from the ambulance bay, since he was listed as my secondary emergency contact, and she was my first. And some part of that call, he still won't repeat word for word, just that it involved him telling my wife, as calmly as he could manage with his hands shaking, that I might not survive the night. Renee got to Renown a little after 8 that evening, before they could take me back for surgery. Dr. Marsh needed consent from next of kin since I wasn't in any condition to sign anything myself, so she sat down with her in the family consultation room to walk through it. Marcus was in the hallway outside, close enough to hear most of it through the door. I need you to understand the risk here, Dr. Marsh told her, according to Marcus. This is a full aortic repair given the extent of the tear. Survival odds through the night are not something I can promise you. I need your signature either way. But I also need you to be prepared for what tomorrow might look like. Marcus said Renee signed without asking a single follow-up question. Not, what are his exact odds? Not, what should I do if it doesn't go well? Not even, can I see him first? Just her signature. And then she asked the nurse where the nearest bathroom was. I didn't know any of this yet, lying unconscious on an operating table 40 feet of hallway away. But somewhere in that consultation room, my wife had already made up her mind that I was as good as gone. Here's the part that still sits wrong in my chest, worse than the surgical scar ever did. Renee came to the hospital exactly twice in those first 2 weeks after I came out of surgery. The first time she stood by the door, not the bed, the door, and asked Marcus, not me, whether I was going to be able to work again or if we're looking at disability. The second time, she brought a stack of papers from her attorney for me to sign regarding some accounts that need updating while you're out. I was still on oxygen. I signed without reading them, because reading a legal document through a haze of morphine and fear is not a skill they teach you anywhere. I didn't know it yet, but one of those pages had my signature agreeing to a temporary financial power of attorney. And I definitely didn't know that inside 2 weeks, Renee would use it to walk into a courthouse and start the fastest divorce filing Washoe County had seen that quarter, while I was still hooked up to a heart monitor, believing, in my drugged-up haze, that my wife was simply too overwhelmed with worry to visit more than twice. I wasn't the one who was overwhelmed with worry. I was, according to the version of events I'd pieced together weeks later, a liability she was calculating her exit from. Because, as far as Renee Ashby understood the math, her husband was a mid-level government contractor with a bad heart, a used truck, and maybe $11,000 in a joint savings account. A man who was, statistically speaking, more likely to die on that operating table than walk out of it. She wasn't planning a future with a sick husband. She was planning a future without one, and she wanted to be first in line to file before the sympathy ran out and the bills started rolling in. She had no idea what she was actually leaving on the table. 9 days after the surgery, still hooked to a monitor that beeped every time my heart rate so much as considered doing something interesting, a woman I'd never met walked into my hospital room holding a manila envelope like it was a delivery of flowers. "Gordon Ashby?" she asked. You've been served. I want to tell you I had some witty response ready. I didn't. I just stared at the envelope while Marcus, sitting in his usual chair, stood up so fast he knocked his coffee off the tray table. Served with what? Divorce petition, Washoe County District Court. The woman didn't even make eye contact past the first sentence, just handed it over and left like she was dropping off a pizza. I read it twice through slow because my hands were shaking and the words kept sliding around the page. Irreconcilable differences. Request for the marital residence. Request for the 2019 Chevy Tahoe. A note that Renee's attorney had filed for an expedited hearing given the petitioner's belief that respondent's medical condition may impact timely proceedings. Translation? She wanted this finalized fast, before I recovered enough to fight it, and definitely before I recovered enough to ask any real questions about our finances. She filed while you were unconscious, Marcus said. And I watched something shift behind his eyes. The specific look of a man recalculating 14 years of holiday dinners and backyard barbecues in real time. Gordon, she filed while you were unconscious. I didn't say anything for a long minute. My heart monitor kept its steady, insulting beep, like it hadn't gotten the memo that my life had just cracked in half a second time in 3 weeks. Here's the thing about betrayal. The real kind, not the movie kind. It doesn't arrive with violins. It arrives on hospital letterhead, delivered by a stranger who's already thinking about her next stop. I called my own attorney that afternoon, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Diane Corso, who'd handled my company's contracts for a decade. She came to the hospital in person rather than doing it over the phone, which should have told me how serious she thought this was before she spoke a single word. She pulled a chair up next to the bed, spread the filing out across my blanket, and read through it twice in complete silence while I watched her face for any kind of reaction. Okay. She tapped the second page, finally breaking the silence. 2 things. First, I need you to tell me exactly what you signed while you were on pain medication in this room. And I need you to tell me right now, because I think you signed something you shouldn't have. There was a form about accounts. She told me it was routine. Something about keeping the bills paid while I was out. Do you remember the words power of attorney anywhere on that form? I didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was that I didn't remember much of anything from that stretch of days beyond pain and fluorescent light. Diane read that silence correctly. Gordon, she's not just filing for divorce. She's moving to finalize before you're well enough to contest asset division. And that power of attorney you signed, she's already used it to close 2 accounts and initiate a transfer on the truck title. While I was still intubated, the words came out flat, mostly aimed at myself, testing whether saying it out loud made it feel any more real. It didn't. It just made it feel worse. While you were still intubated, Diane confirmed. I've seen a lot of messy divorces, Gordon. I have never once seen one filed against a man who was still on a cardiac monitor. So what happens now? Now she tries to push this through as fast as possible before you're well enough to show up and contest it. Diane closed the folder, already thinking 2 steps ahead the way she does. I'll be honest with you. Nothing about this is going to hold up long term. A judge who sees these dates side by side, a documented coma, a power of attorney signed under medication, a default entered before you could even sit up in bed. That's not a clean divorce. That's a filing built to collapse the second anyone with a law degree looks at it sideways. She just doesn't know that yet. Right now, she's betting you won't be well enough to fight it for a long time. She's wrong about that, too. I didn't know it yet. But Renee hadn't just given up on our marriage. She'd made a calculated bet that I was a dying man with nothing worth staying for, and she was cashing out before the body was even cold. The finalization went through faster than Diane had ever seen, helped along by the fact that I was, medically speaking, in no condition to show up and contest anything in the first 2 weeks. By the time I was strong enough to sit up in a chair without the room spinning, Renee Ashby legally became Renee Whitlock again, keeper of the old Southwest house and the Tahoe, having walked away with what she believed was the full extent of what 14 years had built. On paper, for now, exactly as Diane had predicted it would be. She had absolutely no idea that Ashby Structural Group held a rolling 5-year state contract worth considerably more than the house, the truck, and her salon combined. Because I'd never once let her see the actual books. My father's warning had done its job. She divorced a man she thought was broke and dying. She had no clue she'd just handed away her claim to something worth a great deal more. 12 days after the papers were served. I counted, because grief makes you a very precise bookkeeper. Renee married a man named Bradley Chen at a courthouse in Carson City, Nevada, a suburb. Well, the capital, a short drive up the road from Reno. I found out about it from Marcus, who showed up at the outpatient recovery lounge holding his phone out like it might bite him. "Gordon, before you look at this, I need you to remember your blood pressure is a factor in your recovery right now." "Marcus, what?" He turned the screen around. A photo. Renee in a champagne-colored dress. Some silver-haired man in a linen suit beside her. Both of them mid-laugh under string lights. Captioned, "New chapter. Same sparkle." Who is that? Some part of me already suspected the answer wasn't going to be good. Guy named Bradley Chen. Real estate developer. They got married yesterday at the courthouse. I read the caption twice, then a third time. Mostly to see if it would say something different if I gave it another chance. 12 days, Marcus. 12 days since the papers were served. I know. I'm still doing breathing exercises to sit up in bed, and she's already got a husband. Marcus didn't say anything clever back that time. He just sat down next to me, quiet, and let me stare at a phone screen for as long as I needed to. Bradley, it turned out, was a real estate developer, 51 years old, silver hair, the kind of watch Renee's salon friend's husband wore. He'd been building a luxury townhome development along the Truckee River called Cascade Point. And from everything I pieced together later through Marcus's wife, Renee had met him at a Chamber of Commerce mixer roughly 4 months before my surgery. 4 months. Do the math on that one yourself. I remember staring at that photo and feeling something I hadn't expected. Not rage. Relief. Because for 14 years, I'd wondered, somewhere in the quiet parts of my brain, whether I was the problem, whether I was too boring, too plain, too unimpressive to hold on to. And here was my answer, time-stamped and posted publicly for the world to see. It was never about me being enough. It was about me being convenient, right up until I stopped being useful. I called my mother that same night, mostly because I didn't know who else to tell something like that to. Patricia Ashby has never been a woman who raises her voice, and she didn't raise it then either. But I heard something in it go cold and flat in a way I'd never heard before. Not even the night my father died. She married someone else already. Not a question. She was letting the words sit in her own mouth first, the way she does when she's deciding how angry she's allowed to be. 4 months before my surgery, Mom. That's the part I keep landing on. 4 months. You're telling me she was seeing this man while you were still living under the same roof? Looks that way. There was a long pause. I cleared her gutters. My mother finally said, and there was something almost disbelieving in it, like she was still trying to reconcile the woman who'd told her she wasn't welcome in her own son's kitchen with the woman capable of this. I brought that woman a casserole, and she couldn't wait for me to leave. And this whole time, I know. You come stay with me the second they let you out of that hospital. I don't want to hear an argument about it. I didn't argue. I was discharged 3 weeks later with a chest full of titanium wire and a folder of cardiac rehab appointments, and I moved in temporarily with my mother and Sparks because the old Southwest house, the porch swing I built, the gutters my mother had helped clear, now belonged on paper to a woman who'd left me for a man in linen while I was still learning to breathe on my own again. I didn't know it yet, but Renee's math had one enormous flaw in it, and it was about to come due for both her and the man she'd traded me for. Cardiac rehab is slow, deliberate work, and it gives you a lot of time to think, mostly while walking on a treadmill at a pace that would insult a tortoise. Marcus came with me most Saturdays, sitting in a plastic chair by the window, pretending to read on his phone while actually watching my monitor like he didn't trust the machine to do its own job. "You've been awfully quiet." Marcus kept his eyes on his phone one of those mornings, not looking up. "Just thinking about her, about how long I let myself get talked down to without saying a word back. 14 years, Marcus. I built a whole company nobody could talk down to, and I let one person do it at my own kitchen table for over a decade. You loved her. I loved who I thought she was in year 1. I'm not sure that woman ever really existed past the honeymoon. I watched the treadmill numbers climb slow and stupid, 0.3 of a mile an hour at a time. Feels like recovering from 2 different surgeries at once. Honestly, one's on my heart, the other's on my pride." Marcus didn't say anything clever back that time, which for him is its own kind of respect. He just nodded and went back to pretending to read his phone, close enough that I knew he wasn't going anywhere. I used those long, slow weeks to do something I probably should have done years earlier. I finally let Diane Corso walk me through exactly what Renee's rushed divorce had actually accomplished, legally speaking. Turns out, not much in the end. Nevada courts take a dim view of asset transfers pushed through while one party is medically incapacitated and represented under a limited power of attorney obtained under those circumstances. Diane filed a motion to reopen the settlement based on the timing, the medical records showing my incapacity, and the 2 account closures made without my informed consent. It wasn't a quick fight, but it was a fight I was going to win. And Renee's new husband's attorney knew it the moment he read the filing. That, it turns out, was the least of Bradley Chen's problems. Marcus called me about 6 weeks after Renee's courthouse wedding, and I could tell from the first word he was trying not to sound as amused as he clearly was. "You sitting down?" "I'm always sitting down these days, Marcus. Doctor's orders." Cascade Point, Bradley's big project. A whole section of retaining wall gave out behind Building 3 last night. Spring runoff. Dumped half the riverbank straight into the parking garage. Anybody hurt? No. Thank God. Empty garage. Middle of the night. But the county pulled every permit on the site this morning and ordered an independent structural review. They fast-tracked that permitting with some private firm. Not us, obviously. Marcus paused, and I could hear him grinning through the phone. Guess who the county's engineering board is recommending for that independent review? I want to be clear. I did not go looking for this. Marcus called back 2 days later, half laughing, half stunned, and I could practically hear him holding his phone out like it was a winning lottery ticket, even over the line. Gordon, you need to see who's asking the state for an emergency contractor list. I recused myself from that specific project. Obviously, conflict of interest is a real thing, and Diane would have had my head. But I didn't need to be the one holding the clipboard to watch it unfold from a safe distance. The review came back ugly. Bradley had cut corners on soil compaction and drainage to hit a construction deadline, the same corners my firm would have flagged 18 months earlier had anyone bothered to hire us. 3 lenders pulled their financing inside of a month. 2 lawsuits followed. Bradley Chen, real estate developer, watch wearer, linen suit owner, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection by early autumn. Renee had left a man she believed was dying and broke to marry a man she believed was thriving and secure. She'd been wrong about both of us. Word travels fast in a city the size of Reno, especially through a hair salon where half the clientele's husbands work in construction permitting or the county assessor's office. By the time Bradley's bankruptcy filing hit the local business paper, Renee's salon had already started bleeding appointments. Not because anyone blamed her directly for Cascade Point, but because nothing kills a beauty business faster than becoming the subject of everyone's breakroom gossip. Her friend Karen Voss, who I'm told had been the one cheering loudest for the Bradley Chen marriage from the very beginning, apparently stopped returning her calls somewhere around the second lawsuit. Meanwhile, my own situation had done something Renee never saw coming because she'd never once bothered to ask. The state's 5-year contract renewal with Ashby Structural Group came up that same fall, and given our clean safety record, and frankly, given the very public mess at Cascade Point making my firm's reputation look even better by comparison, the state didn't just renew, they expanded the scope, adding 2 additional counties to our inspection territory. A regional engineering trade publication ran a small feature on the firm a few weeks later. Reno's Quiet Bridge Doctor: How One Local Firm Became the State's Most Trusted Name in Structural Safety. There was a photo of me in front of the Virginia Street Bridge, still a little gaunt from the surgery, cane in hand, looking nothing like a man anyone would have bet on 8 months earlier. I didn't know it yet, but that article was about to reach exactly the one person I never expected to read it. 3 days after Bradley's bankruptcy became public record, my phone rang at 9:40 on a Thursday night. Renee's name lit up the screen for the first time since the divorce, and I let it ring 4 times before I answered. Not out of spite, just because I genuinely needed the extra seconds to decide if I wanted to. Gordon! Her voice cracked on the second syllable of my own name. Gordon, I need to talk to you. About what, Renee? I saw the article. About your company, about the contract. A pause, wet and unsteady. Gordon, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know you had any of that. You never once told me. You never once asked. My voice came out flatter than I expected. You just assumed. There's a difference. I thought you were dying. And there it was, out loud. The thing I'd suspected for months but never heard confirmed. The doctor said you might not make it. I panicked. I thought I was going to be a 42-year-old widow with a house I couldn't afford on my own and a business that barely breaks even. And Bradley seemed secure. I let the words sit there a beat. You thought Bradley seemed secure. I made a mistake. Her voice went thin, close to breaking. Bradley's filing for bankruptcy. The bank's already started foreclosure paperwork on our house. His house, the one we bought together. I have nowhere to go, Gordon. I have nothing. I sat with that for a second in the quiet of my mother's back porch, looking out at the same stretch of foothills I used to see from the porch swing I'd built with my own hands in a house that wasn't mine anymore. Gordon, please. We were happy once. Remember? Remember the wedding? Remember Tahoe? I remember all of it, Renee. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I remember every single year, and I remember exactly which year you decided I wasn't worth staying for. You didn't marry a man you loved. You married a man you thought had money. And when you thought I didn't have it, you left me on a hospital monitor to go find somebody who did. Now that man's broke, too. And suddenly you remember my number. That's not fair. No. I cut in before she could finish. What wasn't fair was a stranger walking into my ICU room with divorce papers while I still had a chest tube in. What wasn't fair was finding out my marriage ended over Instagram before I could walk to my own mailbox. She was crying now. The real kind, not the performative kind she used to pull out during arguments to shut them down early. I have nowhere else to turn. Her voice cracked again. Please, Gordon. I know. I meant it, oddly enough. I hope it works out for you. I mean that. But it's not going to work out with me. I hung up. I didn't block her right away. I did that the next morning, calmly, over coffee, the same way you'd delete a contact for a dentist's office you'd switched away from. Diane called 2 months later with the outcome of the reopened asset motion. The judge ruled in your favor, fully. She cited the medical timeline, the power of attorney circumstances, all of it. A pause on the line, papers shuffling. You're getting a significantly larger share than the original settlement gave you, Gordon. The court's language was pretty blunt. Executed in bad faith during a period of documented incapacity. That's about as clean a win as I've ever gotten you. I wasn't doing it for the money, Diane. I know. You were doing it because a woman walked into your ICU room with divorce papers while you still had a chest tube in. And that's not something a court should just wave through because it was inconvenient to fight. She let that sit a second. How does it feel? Honestly, lighter than I expected. I hadn't fought for spite. I fought because the timing of what Renee had done was, by any honest measure, exploitative. And I wasn't going to let that stand simply because standing up for myself felt exhausting after everything my body had already been through that year. I sold the old Southwest house, my half of the settlement, once resolved, rather than moving back in. Some places hold too much weather in them, if that makes sense. Instead, I bought a modest cabin outside Incline Village, near the same lake where I'd met Renee 15 years earlier, which either sounds like poetic justice or a man refusing to let one bad decade ruin one good lake. Both, probably. Marcus and his family come up most weekends. My mother has her own room now, and nobody's ever once called her an uninvited guest in it. I still run Ashby Structural Group. Bigger now, 4 employees, still contracted with the state, still climbing under bridges most people never think twice about. My cardiologist tells me my numbers look better than men 15 years younger, and I believe him, mostly because I finally have a life calm enough to let my heart actually rest. Renee, last I heard through Marcus's wife, moved back in with her own parents outside Fernley. The salon closed for good about 4 months after Bradley's bankruptcy finalized. I don't wish her anything cruel. Genuinely, I don't have the appetite for it anymore. But I also don't spend any time wondering how she's doing. There's a difference between forgiveness and forgetting the lesson, and I intend to keep the lesson. Here's what I've come to understand. Sitting on a different porch than the one I built, looking out at different water than the Truckee River. Some people will only ever value you in proportion to what they think they can extract from you. The moment they think there's nothing left to take, they leave. And the moment they realize they left something enormous on the table, they come crawling back. Not out of love, but out of arithmetic. I spent 14 years being underestimated by the one person who was supposed to know me best. Turns out being underestimated, if you survive it, is its own kind of quiet advantage. She never once asked what I actually made. She never once asked what my company was really worth. She built an entire exit strategy on an assumption. And assumptions, it turns out, make for very poor foundations. A fact I happen to know professionally, and now personally, better than almost anyone in the state of Nevada. Last Saturday, Marcus drove up to Incline Village with his wife and kids, and we sat out on the new porch, smaller than the old one, no swing yet, but I'm getting to it. eating grilled trout he'd caught that morning off the dock. My mother sat in the good chair, the one nobody's allowed to take from her, telling my nephew a story about my father she's told 100 times and somehow still gets choked up on. Roxy, who I got custody of in the settlement and consider my single greatest legal victory, was asleep across my boots. "You look good, Gordon," Marcus said, watching the lake go orange with the sunset. "I mean, better than before all this. Feels that way most days." "You ever think about her?" "Some. Not the way I used to." I scratched behind Roxy's ear and she didn't even open her eyes. "Mostly, I think about how close I came to spending the rest of my life being quietly talked down to by somebody who was only ever doing math on me, and how grateful I am my own heart, of all things, is what finally forced the truth out into the open. I didn't need her to see my worth to have it. I just needed to survive long enough to watch her realize hers was the only thing that had actually been fake the whole time."